and I put it in the middle of my mum and dad's coffee table. They were at work, and I lit all these candles around this alien head, and I meditated in front of it to see if I could get any messages.
Hi, I'm Jess. Today we're opening up on ceremony for enthusiasts, iconoclasts, anarchists, and you. Oh, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a podcast day today, so I'm in a really high, happy mood, and I have a new studio. So for those of you who haven't tuned in the past couple of times, you might hear traffic and you might hear seagulls, but you won't hear cats. So beware that if you hear wailing in the background, it's seagulls, not people. I'm really excited for today because I have Sally. Is it Garozzo?
It is,
Sally,
yes,
it's Garozzo.
Garozzo.
I didn't want to call you the wrong name, but Sally Garozzo, who, well, we met randomly. It was brilliant. We've been being on each other's podcast and have a lot in common. And I'm going to just read out what she said about herself, because I think in a way, sometimes it's better to just have people introduce themselves on their own terms, in their own words. So Sally Garozzo is a multi-award-winning clinical hypnotherapist using Rapid Transformational Therapy and a trauma-informed coach. She has a special interest in every aspect of behaviour change, but particularly around the menopause transition. She helps people with symptoms like fears, phobias, anxiety, depression, insomnia, etc. I like the etc.
Yeah.
And she thrives by having a diverse range of clients, extracting and cross-pollinating ideas and resources. And it's an absolute, in its essence, it's just about helping people feel deeply at home with themselves and empowered by their minds. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. Alongside this, she's the host of the podcast, The Menopause Mindset, which I highly recommend. Really, really interesting, very broad and open. It's really good. And offers 2 self-paced online courses for wellness practitioners. One for cold water therapy, which terrifies me, although I did go swimming the past couple of days in the sea, which was amazing. And one for menopause wellbeing. So we're just going to talk the way we always do on this podcast, but we're hoping to talk a little bit about daily rituals, and it sounds like I'm in for a treat with a little surprise one that I've not heard about before.
You're going to love it.
I'm excited for that. So I'm just going to ask you to say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start asking a few questions.
Okay, so, well, thank you so much, Jess, for inviting me onto your podcast. And hello, listeners. I hope you're having a really gorgeous day, whatever you're doing listening to this. Right, where to start? Like, when you've got a clean slate, where do you start? There are so many threads that I could begin with. But basically, I think I've always really been fascinated in the rich world of feelings, thoughts. One of my therapists actually said to me the other day, because we were talking about my husband and me, and some, things get stale and you want to revamp things. And I was talking about how we have conversations, me and my husband, and sometimes the conversation doesn't flow very well. And she said to me, do you talk about objects, or does he talk about objects or subjects? I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, no, he's very much an object person. Like, he collects football cards and he goes metal detecting and collects. He's a collector, and I've never, ever really been into collecting objects per se. I've always been a subject person and a feeling person and a philosophizing person ever since I was a little girl, really. Like, my nan was in the Salvation Army, and she was always very philosophical, and she would always indulge that side of me, whereas my mum and dad were kind of too busy with their business, I think, to really indulge that. And then when I was 14, I had a really close friend at school, and her mum she was a stay-at-home mum, I think, but she had a real interest in alternative therapies. I think she did like reflexology. She certainly at the time was into what you would call new age thinking, and metaphysics. And she had like a stack of books, and I would just sit on the floor and just take all of her books off her bookshelf. And I would just sit there and read all this stuff about affirmations and how your thoughts affect your reality and all of that stuff. So right from a young age, I think I was just prepped. I think I just came out of my mum's vagina being that way, an advanced soul maybe, or I don't know, just tuned into things that weren't physical reality, I don't think I've ever thought of myself as psychic, but certainly a thinker. I will overthink absolutely anything.
I feel like we're kindred spirits. Definitely kindred spirits. Yeah, relate so closely. I want to ask you a little bit about your favorite ceremony, because I have a sense I'm going to really love the answer. Tell me about your favorite ever ceremony that you've ever been to.
So, first of all, I just love that there is a podcast about ceremony. So thank you for creating this fantastic podcast about ceremony. It's so needed in the world that we live in. And I think I haven't actually been to a lot of ceremonies. I'm not one of these people. I don't have stacks of friends. I don't get invited to loads of weddings and baby showers and things like that. I have been to a few, obviously, but the best ceremony that I ever attended, I think, and I'm going to be really selfish, was my own hen party. Now, I'm not a drinker. I don't drink, so it wasn't like, walking down as you do in Brighton with all these like wild hen parties. I specifically, and it was really nice because my friend organised it for me. And I thought that was just so lovely to have someone do that for me, because typically I'm the helper and I'm the one that organises everything. And I was really nervous. I didn't know what I was going to get. I didn't know whether she was going to get me a stripper. I didn't know really what was going to happen, but she organised this lovely, wholesome hen. She called it a wholesome hen. And it was with just probably like 10 of my friends. And what she got them to do, and in preparation for this podcast, I got all the cards out that they wrote for me. So she got my friends to write out their most favourite memory of us, me and that person. And I read the cards out, and it stirred so much emotion in me, because I'm such a loner, like I really am. And that's one thing that will get me into quite a pit of despair sometimes. And it comes from, being an only child and having to deal with a lot of, attention on me. And I would escape into my head and I would find solace in aloneness, really. But I've carried that pattern through my life. And it's a double-edged sword. I'm very independent. I get on with things. I'm quite happy in my own company. But sometimes I feel the darkness of that. And to actually have all these lovely things written about me just really melted the ice, so that was nice. And my mum, bless her, sent in loads of photographs of me, and I had to explain what these photographs were. And it was just such a lovely thing, like a beautiful reflective moment for me and all my friends to really just sort of appreciate our friendships, So that was really nice. I think that was my favourite one. I've done some other weird ones as well, which were lovely. I did, I think when I was, I'm just trying to think of my age now, early 30s, I was really into angels, Diana Cooper, Doreen Virtue, all of that stuff. And I attended this long course. It was like every weekend for 6 weeks around Atlantis, being an Atlantean in a past life. And we would do these meditations where we would connect with beings from other worlds and stuff. And it was bonkers, but it was bloody brilliant. I loved it. And the final ceremony, we all got dressed up as Atlantean beings. And I had this turquoise, it was Egyptian cotton thing that I'd bought from Egypt. It's beautiful turquoise long dress with beautiful embroidery. And we just we all paraded around in a circle singing songs around the crystal, all this stuff. It was just so funny.
How brilliant is that? I feel horrible for laughing because it's no more or less bizarre than any other ritual, really, when you take it apart. And also, it was really meaningful for you at
Yeah,
that
it
point
really
in your
was.
life. So
Absolutely.
that's amazing. I'm never, ever, ever. You're definitely the first person to ever say hen night and the first person to ever say ceremonies around Atlantis. That is absolutely brilliant. How funny. Are you still in touch with any of that?
No. So when I decided to train to become a hypnotherapist, I learned a lot about psychology and behavioral patterns, and actually everything that I used to link, every kind of humanistic trait in the past, I would link to something spiritual. When I had like a hardcore psychological grounding for it, I sort of stopped going into the etheric and all those kind of narratives and stories. I wanted something a little bit more grounding. I had to really to be able to deal with the kind of stuff that I was working with, like OCD, like really bad mental health problems with people. So I sort of went into that, and I really lost my spirituality for quite a number of years. And then I discovered a lady called Eileen Day McCusick, and she does tuning forks. She's a tuning fork specialist, sound healer, you would say. And I read her book, and in her book, I found a scientific explanation for all of the weird stuff that I was into, and that really satisfied me. So it's like I now have a foot in both worlds. So I feel like I'm more integrated as a person now. Yeah.
Don't you think that's partly growing up as well? That you that's exactly what happened to me. Really quite fervent, slightly off the wall beliefs, or really very imaginative, otherly belief.
Yeah.
And then nothing, like, well, it must all be nonsense. And then really deeply religious, and then nothing. And now the integrating, things becoming less black and white, I think. I think it's like the grey areas. You feel more able to inhabit the grey areas when you get older. Maybe it's a post-menopause thing or a menopause thing. I don't know. What about a terrible ceremony or something that was less good?
Well, it wasn't less good for me, but I think it was a shock to my dad. So basically, I was telling you about those early days when I was really into Louise Hay and my friend's mum. I'd really gone into a whole kind of exploration into extraterrestrial. Actually, no, this was way later. I'd got a boyfriend who was channeling. He was channeling, and it was my first foray into extraterrestrials, basically. And we went to Avebury, and we saw the orange twinkly lights dancing around in the sky, whatever they are. And we sat in crop circles and stuff. And I was really, really into this whole thing. And I bought a beautiful picture of an alien head. Okay, it was like a card, the little grey thing with the big eyes. And I put it in the middle of my mum and dad's coffee table. They were at work, and I lit all these candles around this alien head, and I meditated in front of it to see if I could get any messages, right? And my dad comes home from work and sees it there, and he's like, "What are we doing now? Worshipping aliens?"
I just remembered something as you were talking. I remember when I was young lighting loads of candles in the bath, and there's this idea of soaking in the bath surrounded by candlelight. And I remember my dad knocking on the door and saying, "Are you all right in there?" The things we do, and we don't need to explain them because they're very real, aren't they? In the moment.
They're really real to us, and they're really meaningful. I mean, maybe it wasn't a ceremony as such, but it was definitely a ritual that I wanted to perform, and I had all the incense going, and that this couldn't be further away from my dad's reality. He's so grounded in planet Earth and just thinks it's a load of hoo-ha, all that stuff. So yeah.
My cousin is a ghost hunter. She's got all the equipment and everything. Honestly.
Wow.
Yeah. I believe it's an interesting thing. Tell me a little bit more. You used the word ritual, and I'm increasingly using ritual and ceremony interchangeably.
Oh.
You were going to talk a little bit about your daily rituals and the things that you get up to in your house. I'm beginning to feel like it might be quite interesting, whatever it is.
Well, I sort of go through phases really with ritual, things like meditation and just breath work and just intention setting. But one thing I try to do every day is intention setting, whether that's just over a cup of tea or whether I'm doing something a little bit more solid. The problem I have is I live in a flat, and in the summer I get very restless and I have to go out first thing in the morning to get some fresh air. So what I do actually is I if the sea's nice and flat, I will go in the sea, but I will sort of ritualize that. So I'll sit just before I go in and I'll just set an intention for what I want to let go of, what I want the sea to sort of wash away, and what I want to bring in for the day, really. So it's not just, you're not just going through the motions, you're actually using your intent. I think intention is such a powerful thing and such a really underused thing in our everyday lives. I think we do use it a lot in ceremony, but in our everyday lives, it's there for the taking. It's just a moment in time that is all that's needed to set an intention. Like for me, setting the intention for going a bit slower, being a little bit more mindful, for not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions, which is what I often do with my overthinking brain.
I did something really similar with the swimming when I went swimming the other day, because I recently I do the same thing. I set intentions in the morning and I have a book, and I've even started writing it in the past tense. I did this today, or I did that, or the present tense, and that's been really interesting.
That's interesting. Yeah. So
someone told me about it. Carry on.
When I had spinal surgery in 2010, and I was terrified about it. I'd never had surgery before in my life. And the spiritual teacher that I was seeing, she said to me, write a letter from your future self stating how well the operation went, and give it details like, you had a really jovial nurse, and you woke up and you were able to wiggle your toes and you came round really quickly, and you actually really enjoyed the whole process and your recovery was amazing. And I did it, and I followed through on everything, and I did have a really jovial nurse. Yeah. And when I woke up, the first thing I did, even before she'd got me round, even before she told me, I'd wiggled my toes just to make sure that I still had, connection with the lower half of my body. And my recovery was really, really quick. It was just, it's almost like I'd mapped it out. I'd future mapped it, and I was just now following the route.
That's fascinating. I wouldn't have believed it. I would not have believed how powerful it is until I tried it. And in fact, when I went in the sea the other day, I'd had this moment where I'd been doing the intention setting and just doing a bit of thinking. And I just had this feeling of having been someone who carried life all my life. I'd carried life. And I just had this moment when I thought, you need to let life carry you. And so I went out. It was really powerful. I went out to the sea, and I was just thinking, this is symbolic of me allowing myself to be carried by life. I didn't get carried away, literally carried away, but I did think there was something in that. And I did sit for a long time, and then I'm always wide awake with the full moon. And I decided to go and sit by the sea, because in Brighton, you can do that. In Brighton, if you mention the full moon, everybody nods and everybody knows what you mean. Whereas I spent my whole life with people not ever believing me. Anyway, so the full moon came, and I went and sat until it must have been about 2 a.m. I couldn't sleep, and I had all that mad creative energy. And I just went and sat on the beach by the sea and thought about this idea of being carried, and held onto a stone, and then brought the stone back with me, and thought I'll keep this with me to remind me of that moment. And all of these little things are ceremonial, aren't they, in nature? And I think people can sometimes think ceremony is like a state funeral or some kind of big pompous affair, but it can be very small and very daily, very local. And I do
Yes.
think hypnotherapy in all the areas that you've worked in is ceremonial in nature. And I haven't really given that a great deal of thought before.
Well, hypnotherapy, so I do a treatment called Rapid Transformational Therapy, and it's a very, very beautiful, what I call initiation ceremony, really, into into their next trajectory. So someone might be going along a trajectory and they have an RTT session and it changes the trajectory because it's like catapulting you into a new reality, really, through rewiring. It's quite hard to say sometimes. Through this rewiring process. So, and hypnosis isn't anything woo. I mean, hypnosis is just three changes happen. You get more focused. So it's like watching a film. Your focus narrows down to the exclusion of anything else around you, like traffic noises or doorbells or dogs barking or whatever. You become less inhibited. So you're more likely to be more honest about what you're going through, your history, your emotions, your experiences, which makes for a good therapy session, actually, if someone's not screening or masking. And you become more cognitively flexible, which means your brain becomes a little bit more pliable and, you can change those neural pathways. So if you say to someone, you're feeling more empowered about yourself, your confidence is rising. And I usually give loads of metaphors as well whilst I'm creating someone's recording. Like often I'll get someone to imagine that an angel standing behind them and their wings are like enfolding them if they've not felt very safe, or if they've felt disempowered or traumatized, or something in their life has really made them feel wobbly or unlovable. I'll usually put in that kind of image, which is really beautiful. And we go on this journey of reclaiming their power, but also reintegrating. Because when you have trauma, you kind of get a split from self. A split from self happens. And a part of you gets stuck in the past. And it's an energetic part of you. If you could see it, it would be like a blob of plasma, probably, that's stuck on a timeline. And you go back and you kind of scoop up these parts of yourself and bring them back into your own energetic system through announcing it, through visualizing it, through feeling it, just through intention setting, basically. But when we're in hypnosis, that becomes a lot easier to do. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. I could go into so much of it, but essentially, it's a reintegration of all parts. The overprotective part of you, or the wounded child part of you. It's bringing everything back into the now. And then the recording, which you listen to every day for 30 days, is all the good stuff that you want. You put that on repeat and you rewire your brain and you start moving forward in that new way.
And you know what, listeners, it works. I haven't worked with Sally, but I have had this transformational therapy myself. And I hadn't thought of it before in the way that you've described it. And I really love it and it is ceremonial, you're right, because ceremonies are all about a beginning, a transformational, pivotal moment, and the present, and then the future. And it is all about humanizing and integrating. It's very, very similar. And the idea of going back for your traumatized parts and bringing them together is really interesting. And I was just thinking about the therapy that I had when I went into this hypnosis, and I was asked to ask my future self, what did I need to know? Similar to your letter. And my future self said, ask for help. And I refer to her every day because I do always ask for help. And there's another thing that happens with ceremonies, and it's something I did with my dad, was I wrote a letter for my dad and put it in his grave after he died. Because there were things that we did resolve in our life together and things that we didn't resolve. And I needed to do something then, which in practical terms makes no sense, does it? Because obviously he's not there. But in terms of how it impacted my future and how that traumatized part of me went into the future, I think it was quite important. So I can relate to very, very closely to what you're talking about.
These are sort of symbolic things that we do that have meaning. And in the RTT session, one of the little modalities that we do is called dialogue with the hurter. So if dad has come up a lot in the past, in your past trauma or past scenes, I would invite someone and say, let's have a conversation with your dad. So, they get to say, Dad, I need to talk to you. This is really hard for me, but I need to tell you. What is it that you need to tell your dad, and they go on about what it is they need to tell dad that they could never say in real life. Some people say, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be rude to my dad. I'm like, come on. This isn't real. This is like, you can say whatever you want to say. It's just about taking a stance. You're not going to be rejected. Your dad's still going to love you, or, there'll still be a connection there if you want there to be. But it's about acknowledging the feeling, really. People might have felt really angry at dad or really resentful at the way that they got treated or cast aside or ignored. And you can say that. You can actually express a feeling and it be okay, and actually really empowering, because someone, as in the therapist, is sitting there helping you and validating that feeling for you. It's incredibly liberating. And one of the other things that we do as well is we swap places. So I get my client to be the other person. I get my client to be the dad or the mum or whatever and speak from their perspective. Why did you do what you did? If your childhood was so terrible, why did you make the same mistakes with your child? And the client gets to see their father or mother or bully's perspective, and it helps them to really make a resolution with it. Yeah, it's hugely transformational.
That sounds so powerful. And what do people say? What people that have been through that? Have you got any examples of what happens next for people? Because mine really worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, so much can happen. Like, it's just people gain more confidence, people resolve so much. I mean, things like disordered eating, people come for, they might have got narcissistic relationships in their life. Maybe they have to endure a narcissistic boss, and now they can just look at the boss and go, oh my God, you're such a twat,
Yeah.
And not take it personally and just go, I can just see right through your behaviours, and just feel a little bit more, a lot more empowered. And the word is really authentic. So operating from that really authentic place, whatever that means. So living your life really in alignment with your values, they become more decisive. They might become more emotional. They might become less emotional. They might have more courage to express vulnerability. All sorts of things. Their intimate life might improve. Yeah,
so interesting because so much of what you do is so similar to what I do, and yours is a bit more scientifically researched. So there's a lot of evidence-based stuff around this makes a difference.
Oh.
And I was thinking about this morning. So my cousin died a couple of years ago, 18 months ago, I think. Excuse me. And as you know, there's a lot of evidence at the moment that's being researched and is being gathered around the results of not having processed trauma well. And that's obviously your area. And there's a lot of understanding, I don't know how to explain it, not in an academic way, but there's an understanding that over the course of the world, the history of human beings, we have done ritual for a reason. We have done ceremony for a reason. And the reason we've done it is because it helps us to integrate in the way that you describe.
Yeah.
It helps us to be cogent human beings. It helps us to be surrounded by our people, our former selves, our future selves, and all of those transitions get marked in community in these liminal spaces that you're describing, which are not quite of now. They're slightly fantastical places. And they are the safe spaces that we visit in order to work out the things that we can't do in real life, in other contexts which aren't set apart for purpose. And what I think is that people who don't have ceremonies of any sort, I'm not suggesting you have to have a funeral with the body there, but if you don't have any kind of process, I think it impacts people's medical health, physical health, and emotional health, which we know now is all part and parcel of the same thing. So I have this idea, and the reason I'm going around in circles a little bit, and I'm coming to something, is that my cousin died, and my auntie didn't have a funeral for him because he requested no funeral, no fuss. And at the time I thought, oh, it's just because it's your area of interest. It's just because this is something that you're passionate about. They don't want to do it. They don't want anything. They're not going to do it. It's none of your business. I did try and push for something, but I didn't get anywhere. And I found out, it had been kept quiet, I think. I found out that my auntie has been living with cancer for 18 months since her son died. And I have got no way of ever proving the connection. So it's interesting hearing that in your area of work, the research is done, it's evidence-based, science-backed stuff. I don't know, or if anybody out there does know of any research around the impact of ceremony in addressing trauma. I know Esther Perel has done stuff and has opinions around ritual. And I have various books on my bookshelf that I hopefully have time to read. But I do think that there's something to do with not having ceremony, not having communal, or the kinds of spaces that we describe that you are enabling for people and our emotional and physical health. So that's something that really interests me about what you're describing.
Yeah, there's a real synergy between what you're doing and what I'm doing. And, this whole thing of marking the occasion with something, because it, again, and I think it's an energy thing. And I think that's probably why we don't have evidence for it, because it's really hard to measure energy unless you've got the right equipment. And I don't even know if that equipment even exists yet. I'm not in that world. I think it might do, but I think it's on the fringes of science, if I'm honest. But coming back to your point about processing, especially processing grief, it's so important to process. Like it's just physics, okay? So if you think about food, think about how we process the food we eat. It goes in one end, we process it, it grinds away, like it goes through our digestive system, the nutrients are extracted and used as energy for our lives, and then the waste is dumped out the other end. That's not controversial. Everyone accepts that. And I think something happens with our emotions as well. But because our emotions are not visible, they're invisible. I think you mentioned something about this in one of our conversations. Because it's so invisible, we don't give it the weight that it.
Yeah, that was to
desires.
do with symbols and rituals being an external sign of an invisible grace, an external sign of an invisible grace or an inner process. And you said that's like turning the inside out.
Yeah,
ceremonial spaces allow that. And yeah, that's such a good way of describing it, like a digestive tract. Hopefully we'll find ways of proving it. But this is part of everybody that's listening. This is part of why I'm doing this podcast, because I need you to understand, first of all, that ceremonies can be whatever you need them to be, but also that you really need to have them, because I really believe that they're healthy for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we believe that energy exists, and if we believe that we have an energetic body, this sort of electromagnetic field around us, which I think is probably where the emotions are, and then they're also in the organs as well, like the liver is anger and the stomach is, I think that's worry, or that represents worry, and the kidneys represent fear. That's where our emotions are stored. If we're not processing them and moving them through the body, they are going to stagnate. And we are typically a grief illiterate culture. And I would go so far as to say like an emotionally stunted culture that we live in. Not all of us. We live in a bit of a bubble here. Constipated.
Yeah, Brighton
there
really
you go.
is the bubble.
Brighton is the bubble. But, coming back to that digestive metaphor, that emotional constipation is such a perfect way of putting it, because you're not allowing it to flow,
So one of your areas of specialism is menopause, and I'm obviously, as you know, thinking about doing menopause ceremonies, and I have a couple of people booked in. And I know that you're thinking about ceremonial things that you want to do.
Yeah.
But your menopause work is really interesting because it's not a negative approach, and it's not an entirely medical approach. And I really love that, and I think we share that interest. So I'm interested in how this emotional constipation that we're talking about, this not processing, how lots of different aspects of your life can all converge at menopause, where we've talked about this before, didn't we, on your podcast, where you might be in your 50s, say you happen, so typically it's around late 40s and 50s. Let's say you, very, very often women in their 50s get divorced, very, very often their children leave home, although increasingly they don't leave home. Often there's this huge role change, and even if your kids stay at home, you might not be a caregiver anymore for them, but you might then start to mourn your parents dying and become a carer for them instead. And then at the same time, you've got this feeling of being in the third part of your life and wondering who you are you without that caring responsibility, but with this one. And everything gets lost for people who identify as women in that moment. And I really want to do some ceremonies with people and just see whether it helps with that processing all of those different knotty griefs which happen, even just empty nest syndrome, all of those things happening at the same time. And I'm just really intrigued to know whether processing all of those little griefs would alter the nature of the menopause experience. So that's something that I'm interested in.
I absolutely think it would. I really do. Yeah, why wouldn't it? If we're working towards something, if we have this thing in mind where that there's a point in time where we're going to have a ceremony, and we understand, really, I think it's about understanding what menopause actually is beyond the hormone changes. I think if we can get that message out there, I think people will have a much better time of the menopause transition, because it is a bumpy road. It's a death. It's a loss. There's a lot of losses that happen during menopause. Loss of confidence, loss of seeming value, loss of youth, loss of fertility, loss of the way that our body looked, skin elasticity, hair loss, loss of vision. There's so many losses, loss of vaginal elasticity, loss of pleasure, loss of libido. And that doesn't have to mean that you have to live with those losses, because you can get things back. But there is a loss that happens, and that loss will be different for everybody. And the way that you regain power is going to be different for everybody. It's a highly unique journey. And yes, I use that word. I don't know why people have a problem with the word journey, but they do. I don't know.
I keep coming back to it. I haven't found anything better. I really haven't found anything better. So I'm sticking with it.
Yeah, why not?
But I suppose it is a point of loss, isn't it? And journeying and transformation. And I suppose that's why I feel like it's really important. And it used to, for those of you who don't know, there used to be a thing called a croning ceremony, which is still happening in the States, and I have got one coming up. And it doesn't mean croning. It does mean crone, as in old crone, but that used to be a compliment, and it isn't meant to be the old hag. Although there is a book called Hagiography, which is all about that, the idea of the hag, which I need to get on my bookshelf as well. But so this idea of the old crone, which is to depict an old lady, isn't it? Sort of mad old woman, I suppose, that awful stereotype that has been depended upon for so many years by the misogynists. So, we're not talking about the people that used to get burnt at the stake. What we're talking about is people who would wear a crown. So the croning ceremony was the crowning ceremony, that you're in this third part of your life. These are your crowned years, where you are crowned a member of these older people who have wisdom, and we're supposed to have wisdom. So you're belonging. It's actually a ceremony of belonging. And I just wanted to reinvent that idea, and I've had such positive feedback about it as an idea, because I want people to see this as a transitional point in the way that every other part of our lives is. And that's what you're saying. This isn't just about hormones. This is a an holistic thing. This is about all the things. And with any other kind of loss or change, you do mark it. And the point of the ceremony is to do that digesting that you're talking about so that we can start to see the gains. But if we get stuck in the loss and we medicate the loss, we might not ever really get to see what the gains are.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There's so much juice to be squeezed out of menopause, really. It's a huge transition that goes way beyond hormones. It goes way beyond nutrition and diet and lifestyle. It is those things as well, but it's more than that. It's a coming of age. It's, nothing about me is the same anymore. And I'm sort of very late perimenopause, probably in my final year. Have been having very sparse periods over, with like 6-month gaps and things like that. Everything's starting to feel a lot more settled now, but I can feel a part of me now that wants to reawaken. So there was a part of me that really enjoyed going to sleep, if you want to call it that, like go into the cocoon, turn to mush. And now I can feel myself coming back together again, the caterpillar coming back together again, or the butterfly now, and then eventually it's going to want to re-emerge. And I can really feel that happening in my sacral. The sexual energy is coming back, which is a really lovely thing. But I really needed that breakdown. And thankfully, I actually think that interviewing all the guests that I have on my podcast has actually, in a way, been a form of ceremony for me. Been a form of, yeah, and just really having those conversations. And I absolutely want to have a coming of age ceremony with you, and I'm going to have one for my 50th, which is next year. Yeah, and that will be a combination probably of like a menopause ceremony and a 50th, because I really, for my 40th was an absolute disaster. It was such a disaster.
Oh, no.
Talking of like bad ceremonies,
like a comedy disaster or a real disaster? I don't want to laugh if it's not a comedy laugh.
No, it was, looking back it was, but it was almost like the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of the demise into the perimenopause, and I was blind. I had absolutely no idea. So I'd organised this 40th birthday party. My mum and dad had spent probably about £3,000-4,000 on it, and it was a party in Brighton. I had people from all walks of life. They're all my old friends, all my new friends, and I didn't know who I was in that environment. And it's like the old Sally, the 25-year-old Sally was there, but the new kind of mature adult hadn't been fully formed yet. And the 25-year-old Sally, who was still kind of trying to exist, had also like broken down quite a lot. And so everything got flagged up in that moment. And I had the worst panic attack. I had 4 panic attacks.
Oh my God.
And I ended up on the bathroom floor pretty much even before the night had got going. And I had a vagal, so I'd passed out. I was white, and my poor boyfriend at the time, had to announce that I wouldn't be attending my own party. And I just ended up going home. Yeah.
That really isn't funny.
No.
I'm glad I checked now. That's not a comedy disaster, is it?
No, it's not. It's not really. I mean, looking back, I can kind of laugh because I can sort of see what was going on. I've had a lot of therapy now, and it's absolutely fine. But I would love to make my 50th so much different and so much more empowering, because I actually think the 40-year-old in me probably would have wanted a ceremony, something more grounded, something more wholesome. But the 25-year-old hedonist was still in there and still sort of wanted the drink, wanted the lavishness, wanted the sort of, I think we'd hired like a burlesque act and we had a band on, and it was all just too much for my nervous system, truth be told. I didn't even realise I was traumatised at the time. And so, yeah, this was the beginning of my journey into who I am now.
That's so fascinating. And it's so interesting how unique this time of life is. Something about me misses the term, the change. I was talking to my partner about it. How everybody does talk about the menopause now, but when my mum went through it, she used to call it the change, but she was quite old-fashioned. And then we were talking, weren't we, about that program called The Change. There's some merit in that because it talks about a time of life.
Yeah.
And that is what we're talking about, a time of life during which particular things change.
And I love
it's powerful.
I love how intuitive the old folks were. They knew it was a change. And language was simpler back then, and so they just called it the change.
The change, yeah.
Call it as it is, really.
And it really is, isn't it? It really sums up everything that you're talking about. And I do think that one of the really formative points in my life, I was about 25 and I was working in a hospice, and we did all this training. It was fantastic. I look back on it now and it was free. I was a volunteer. And they taught us about loss and change, and the workshop was called Loss and Change. And they said to me at the time, I don't know if this is still current belief, but at the time they believed it. And they said, loss and change are always companions. You never have them apart.
Yeah,
and
so
I've
true.
believed that ever since. My partner's not so sure about it. He said, why do you always associate change with loss? And it is true that it's not always the most helpful way of looking at things, but in general, it's true. So
but when you're comfortable with loss, when loss isn't a dirty word or something negative, then of course you can associate change with loss. Because when you change and you go in and you gain something, you always have to lose something else, even if it's something that you don't want. It's lost, it's gone.
Yeah, I love that idea of how if you close the door on one thing, it enables another door to open, or saying no to one thing means actually saying yes to something else.
Yeah,
that's right. It's really good. I don't know, I bet I've taken up way more of your time than I should.
That's fine.
So, I'm loving this conversation. We could go on all night.
Go for it.
Do you have any regrets? I mean, it sounds to me like that party was a bit of a regret, but do you have any regrets around ceremonies? That's something that you would prefer not to have done in retrospect?
Yeah,
or wish you had done?
I think my 40th, I think I would have liked that to have been a little bit more considered, and I think I would have liked to have been a bit more in tune with myself rather than thinking I've got to have a party because that's what's expected of me. Actually, if I'm honest with myself, I would have preferred something a bit more grounding and a bit more natural, but I didn't know. So I think it is what it is, and it provided so much learning for me, even though I had to go through that horrible sort of experience passing out. I've just learned so much from it, really, and I'm just trying to think if there's any other regrets. No, there isn't.
I feel like regret might not be a thing that you really do. I'm thinking about changing those questions, actually. It's really made me think about, because I didn't really want to party for my 50th either. I wanted to meet all of my 50 of my friends for coffee. But I'm increasingly thinking that for my next big birthday, I'll probably have a gong sound bath thing. I really love them. And they're ceremonial, aren't they?
Yeah.
Something calmer. And maybe it is those stages of life where you might have a big party in your 20s and then something a bit lower key when you're older, or something a bit more intimate. Like you, I don't have masses of friends. I have the ones that I need, and that's that. So I wouldn't want a big thing either. And that's one of the reasons why I think I serve a particular niche, because there are living funerals that you can do which are big parties, or living funerals where you're front and center and people are reading out your eulogy to you. And I want to do living wakes for people who are not so much limelight lovers, a little bit more low-key events. And like you, I don't drink either. So I think those kinds of living funerals are probably for other people to do. But my people are like you. You're my people. So I really understand that. And anything that I've often asked people anything that they hope to do or that they're planning to do with ceremonies. And obviously we've already had conversations like that, and that's come up already in this conversation, and I'm really excited about it. And I'm hoping, interested to hear where you go with the idea of doing a ceremony for how if you were to approach ceremony, if you're out there and you're menopausal, if you were to approach ceremony as a before, a perimenopausal one, a during, and an after. You said that you thought it might be quite interesting to do 3 separate phases of that ceremony, which I'd never ever thought of.
I think you could. I really do. I think the perimenopause is very indicative of like the roller coaster. So there might be some screaming, there might be some like real angst. You know, you might have like what's it called, an effigy, and you just like bat it with some sticks or something.
I should point out that I've had a very unusual menopausal journey, so I can't relate to that, but I know many people who would, and I really like the idea of it. Well, you could have one of those piñata, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Where you whack it and then all the nice things come out of it. That might be good.
Yeah, you could
get together and get our heads together. Anyone out there who has any ideas about things they might like to smash to bits to get all their menopausal rage out, just give us a call.
I think just to have your rage witnessed and to have your rage sort of held in space. You know, this word, holding space, like people don't get it, but if you get it, you get it. If you don't get it, you don't get it. And I really love the idea of holding space because it's so conceptual and it plays into that whole thing of objects or subjects. And, you know, if you think of emotions as energies, holding space for an emotion, for example, is such a powerful thing that we can do to help someone release that emotion. And again, it's like when that emotion is being witnessed, it's making it real for the other person, because I think we drive ourselves mad thinking that we're the only one that feels this thing or that it's too much for our system. Often we feel that emotions are too big to contain, especially anger. Anger's like a really interesting emotion that I feel is not given enough space, actually. I think we shy away from anger like we shy away from grief and loss because it like triggers something within ourselves. But if we can really, like, I think anger ceremonies would be bloody brilliant.
Oh my God, I'm so for that. Anger is so important. And at that very same hospice, the same training, I spoke to the woman that founded this hospice, St. Helena's in Colchester. She's called Elizabeth. And I one day said, I've just worked with a client. I was a masseuse at the time. And she's very angry. And I said it in that kind of apologetic, or wasn't it a shame way? And she said, oh, how I'll never forget. She said, oh, she's really angry. How marvellous. That's fantastic. And I looked I must have looked dumbfounded. Then she said, that's why I founded this hospice, because of my anger. And ever since then, I've thought of anger as a source of power. I don't see it as destructive. I see it as an enabling, empowering force. So I'm with you. I think we should have anger ceremonies.
Yeah. And when we're really comfortable with our own anger, when we witness anger, we're not as triggered by it. So it's something interesting has been happening with me recently. I'm no longer triggered by road rage. So for example, when I was driving on the motorway and someone would tailgate me, I'd be really like pissed off, and it would like really generate my solar plexus, and I'd be putting my foot down and getting really wound up. But now I'm just like, it's fine. I'll just let you pass.
Because you've witnessed your own anger, are you saying?
Yeah, because I'm really comfortable with my own anger. It's like, it's uncomfortable to experience, but also I'm comfortable with it being present. I don't think I'm a bad person because I have anger.
I think that's true. That's definitely true. In fact, that's reminded me of something. I don't recommend this to anyone. It's very bad of me and I shouldn't have done it. There was a man who was having a fit of rage, essentially, in the street at another man who didn't know him. I think this guy had abuse problems, some kind of substance abuse, or he'd been drinking or something, and he was raging at this other poor individual. And I thinking, I don't know, some kind of stupid savior complex, but I just, without thinking, and my partner watched me do it, I just went in and touched him.
Wow.
I shouldn't have done that. No one should have done that. But he loved it and he responded. I just had this instinct that I'd read a lot about the somatic, all that somatic therapy, and how if one touches someone who's in that state, it brings them out of it. But it it worked. It diffused the whole situation, and I thought
Wow.
nothing of it at all, and I was completely unaffected by the experience. But my partner Mrinal watched it. he said, "That's what I mean when I said that you're a fearless person." And I'm not a fearless person, but I am not afraid of anger. So I presumably just went into it knowing it wasn't a frightening form of anger. And I hadn't known what you just told me, that if you witness your own anger and accept your own anger, you tend to be more comfortable with the anger of other people.
Yeah, you don't get as triggered by it for sure. And clearly you weren't, because that's such a beautiful, it's like you're this angel coming down and just like, touch is really powerful though, isn't it? And I guess also the surprise would have jolted him out of the anger. Like,
Oh, you shouldn't touch anyone. You shouldn't touch anyone without consent. I mean, it was awful of me, really. It was stupid, foolish, and all the things, and absolutely the right thing to do as well.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a difficult.
It's really
a difficult
complex.
one. Yeah,
it's really complex, this world that we live in, I think, with consent and everything like that. And I know it's really important to have consent, but I do think sometimes it's making life more and more complex, when actually our basic human need is that need for connection, and increasingly we're needing touch.
Yeah,
as well, more and more touch. We're sort of touch starved, aren't we?
I think we
anyway,
are.
So
That's a whole other thing, isn't it? We learned about that in the pandemic, and that's one of my main things about not having funerals. It really worries me that people won't touch each other, and that's what I think about my poor auntie. No one touched her. I wanted to go to that funeral for my cousin and wrap my arms around my auntie. And ever since then, the opportunity hasn't presented itself. And that's partly on me that I didn't manage to get to Aberdeen, but then Aberdeen. So, I mean, it was just, I always think it's a missed opportunity to hug people that you love. It's a missed opportunity to hold hands and stroke someone's arm, or because we're children when we're grieving, aren't we? And
we are.
When we're children, we want to be held by the grown-ups. And when we have funerals, we get to be the grown-ups for the people in the room who are currently children. And I feel that's the whole thing that we should talk about another time.
Yes.
So,
oh, wow.
I know. We must meet for coffee and just talk about it without everyone having to listen to us. But I'm so glad you're all here listening. Isn't Sally brilliant? I'm so excited to have met her. Tell me something just one last thing I always end with.
Yeah.
Because I want opening ceremony to be a place of hope for people. My work has given me enormous hope for human beings. I'm sure yours has too. But not everyone is party to the conversations that you and I have with the people that we have them with. And human beings are incredible. You hear such awful things and we do terrible things, but there's way more beautiful things that we can do than the horrible things we do. So I just wondered if there's anything that gives you real hope for humanity.
This is an incredibly complex question, but also, can be answered really simply, I guess. What makes me hopeful for human beings? I think the human spirit, actually, knowing that life is actually a self-organizing organism. We have self-organizing properties within us. The body is always seeking homeostasis, is always seeking balance, and so is planet Earth. So are all the other planets in the universe and all the other whatever things in the universe. It's, even though there might be destruction, I almost think that destruction is sort of like part of this self-cleaning, self-clearing kind of process that we go through. Now, I'm no physicist, but I think that principle has got its roots in physics, that everything will organize itself in the end. Everything always seeks coherence. So there's an experiment that you can watch on YouTube if you put in like ticking metronomes or something. So there's like 100 metronomes, and they're all set to the same BPM, but they're all set off at slightly different times. And after a few minutes, well, they first obviously all tick-tocking at totally different times, so it's chaos. You hear all the tick-tocks completely chaotically. But after about like 2 minutes, they all start tick-tocking together. Exactly
Really?
the same. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And
That
these
is
are,
the best answer ever. That is
yeah,
what human beings do. That is
that
why
is
you
what
and
we
I are
do.
passionate about getting people together to do this stuff. And
Exactly.
ceremonial spaces are set apart for that kind of communal TikToking. That's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's exactly what you're doing with all those
Yeah.
different selves, the
Well,
past
yeah,
and the present and the future and all of that and all
that's
of
right.
those emotions.
So
Yeah.
when you give your body and your life the right environment, your body will fix itself. For those people suffering from chronic illness who have probably been traumatized, and, you know, sometimes we have to admit that life is set up, our systems and processes are not set up conducive to health. And there are some people with privilege who do have a much easier time of it because they've got the resources. Environment will also, if your environment is set up for coherence, your body will find, your mind, your body will find a natural homeostasis, will clear itself, will clean itself, will heal itself. And that's why environment's so important as well. Like color is so important, lighting is so important, who you have in your life as well, who you're speaking to in your life. Are they bringing you up or are they pulling you down? If they're pulling you down, that's going to have an effect on your system. When we understand that principle, I think it's also then easier to recognize that we have the power to change, or we have the power to affect, positively or negatively affect other people that we're in proximity with by the attitudes that we have, by our own sense of positivity or negativity. So we have to recognize our own impact. And I think when we can do that, there's hope.
Oh my God, that's such a good way. And that is why we're here, everybody. That is what this is for. This is what Sally is for. Sally, tell everyone how they can find you and get hold of your wisdom and your therapies and offerings.
Thank you for that opportunity. So I have a free, a free relaxation hypnosis recording, which you can get by going to bit.ly/relaxation with Sally. I also have a podcast, which you know about, the Menopause Mindset, and another one, What the Bleep is Behaviour Change Anyway. I co-host that with my friend Serena, who's a psychologist. That's quite interesting. And my website is sallygarozzo.com, and I've got all my, if you want to book in a consultation, you can do that through the website. If you want to have a nosy and see what else I do, feel free to have a look at that.
Are you online? Are you nationwide? Are you local? What do you do in person or?
I do in person, and I also do via Zoom as well. A lot of my sessions are via Zoom. So if you're English speaking, then we can definitely work together for sure. And I'm most active probably on Instagram. If you want to follow me on Instagram, then go ahead. I'm at Sally Garozzo Mind Mentor.
There you go. I'm thrilled to have you in my life, first of all, and to be in yours. That's a huge honour. Delighted that you came here. I was delighted I was able to talk on your podcast too. And I really do hope everyone that you found this as helpful as I have, and that you get in touch with Sally if you feel that anything resonated, that you need to give her a call, because I know for sure that she's intuitive, and you will know. If you need to speak to Sally, you will know, and you will give her a call. So maybe you'll end up sitting around an alien, worshipping an alien. I think she's moved on.
You never know.
Moved on since then.
That event might happen in the future. Who knows?
To all those of you out there, your past, your future, and your present selves, thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe and do all the things, and look up Sally's podcast too. And I'll see you all soon.